Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Still, 5 minutes till afternoon. I'm Garth. I'm head of Digital Records Unit, as Sarah was saying. And you can see I'm doing this with Neil Miller. Neil was meant to be here. He's our head of Digital Records at NRS, but sadly couldn't make it. But I think Neil should be on the internet somewhere, so Neil will be there to offer insight as well, I think. So we're looking at 2 years of transferring a series of Scottish Cabinet records to NRS. And I should say, just to kind of manage expectations, this is actually more of an access talk than a preservation talk, so I hope that's not too disappointing, but we'll see how we'll go. So you're probably wondering a wee bit, what is NRS? So our public task is on screen there for you. And we're a non-ministerial department of the Scottish Government, which is a devolved administration of the UK Government. And we do quite a lot of statutory functions to actually deliver on that public task. We're responsible for the registration of births, deaths and marriages in Scotland. We're responsible for collecting the Scottish census and have nearly finished that, thank goodness, because it's just been happening this year. We also analyse the Scottish population and produce statistics on its population. And we also administer the rather wonderful National Register of Tartan. And that tartan on screen is that of one of Scotland's finest culinary exports. Iron brew, fizzy drink. So it's delicious. Have some if you haven't tried it yet. But perhaps the most relevant statutory function that we do for this audience anyway, is that we're Scotland's National Archive, and we keep Scotland's National Archive, which is 10 centuries old, and the image you see on scene is a close-up of some of the wax seals of perhaps our most famous document, the Declaration of Arbroath, which turned 700 2 years ago during the pandemic. We collect records from a lot of organisations. These are only a few on screen, but in short, it's the public sector in Scotland, it's the Scottish courts and judiciary system, and it's also a large number of private organisations. But maybe what's always quite nice in these sort of presentations is to see some of the faces of the people who actually work with those depositors, and that's Neil and his team in government records. And those people who are client managers, that's their job title, despite being archivists, they're responsible for talking to the depositors and really understanding what's coming to us and making sure that what's coming to us is as well understood as it can be. In terms of digital archiving, the technical parts of that are managed by a separate team. And there we are on screen for you. Some of us are here in this room today. NRS has been collecting born digital records since 1998, so we have some pedigree in this. And that's our lovely home, West Register House in Edinburgh. We run a couple of services to deliver on digital archiving. One of them is the digital accessioning service. I haven't got an awful lot of time to talk through what this service does, but that's the high-level operational workflow on screen. What is quite interesting is our digital repository is based on a lot of our corporate infrastructure, as NRS is, as you probably have gathered from our functions, quite data literate and used to managing highly sensitive data. So we take advantage of that context and sort of use parts of our infrastructure and layer digital preservation tools and principles on top of that. So we're sort of living the philosophy of parsimonious preservation, which my colleague Tim Gollins, back of the room, coined 2009, was it, Tim, roughly? Yeah. So living the dream and delivering on parsimonious preservation. Haven't got time to talk about that. That's an entirely separate talk in itself, but if you want to know more about that, please come and see us. We work very hard on guidance and support to the depositors, because what we want is for them, similar to what Laurie was saying about their stakeholders caring for their software. We want our depositors to care for their records so that we can actually preserve them whenever they come to us, and we want them to make sure that they're in the right, suitable formats, have good metadata, and so on. And what we're obviously wanting them to give us is the ideal transfer package, the perfect SIP, if you like, where we have a lovely, elegant folder of records, a lovely, elegant folder of metadata in wonderfully interoperable formats, and crucially a manifest file containing all the really important metadata that you need for long-term preservation, such as checksums, date last modified, file names, blah, blah, blah. If we get that, everybody's delighted, obviously. How often do we get that? Couldn't really comment, but that's our goal. The Scottish Cabinet records, let's move on to this. I'm probably doing terrible on time here, but so the Scottish Cabinet, it's the group of senior ministers, including the First Minister of Scotland, which decides Scottish Government policy. It came into existence in 1999 following Scottish devolution and the establishment of the Scottish Parliament. It's an active little group. It produces lots of records, and NRS receives these records on an annual basis. Similar to other administrations in the UK, the release is actually quite interesting. So we get the records, we process them, we put them into the repository, and then we have to make them available ahead of their public release date. We make them available to journalists who come into NRS to look at these records ahead of their public release to basically get stories, which they'll publish around New Year, whenever there's nothing going on, at least in the old days anyway. And the Scottish Government, this is helpful for them because it shows people that the information is being released, it supports public accountability, and it's good for NRS as well, really, to have this bit of attention. That process of public release, press release and public release, was all fine up until the 2004 set of records, which were all on paper. The 2005 set of records were born digital entirely, and the 2006 records were the same. And of course, they were due to come to us in autumn 2020 and autumn 2021, and we know what was going on around about then. So that gave some challenges. In terms of the process of transfer, that actually went quite well. We did engage with the depositor, which was the Scottish Government, early on, and the records which we received from them, from their corporate records management system, were actually in pretty good shape. The one snag we had was that Scottish Government have to redact bits and pieces within the records to make them actually open for public access in some cases. And for some reason, in the 2006 set, they took stuff out of emails, redacted those attachments, and then folded those back into the emails again. So we couldn't actually see them at first sight whenever they came in. And that's not great for all sorts of reasons. So, but that was kind of the main lessons learned from that transfer, which actually it wasn't anything massively significant. Oh, COVID's there as well, just in case you forgot about COVID. The access to these things was much, much more difficult. As Sarah was saying, we needed to get an access solution stood up really quickly after we had received these records. And that access solution had to be an online solution as well, given that we were living in COVID and our search rooms were closed. We didn't have anything like that whenever these records were due to come in. Access to digital records was very basic. We could provide invigilated access to a laptop on site, or we could give them a copy on USB stick. But given that we were going to be given these records or making them available to journalists and then to the public, that wasn't going to stand up due to obvious reasons. So those are all the general requirements that were involved in thinking about our access solution. And the screen faces are how worked up and how stressed out we were about having to get this ready in about 6 months roughly, maybe even less than that. And there were two access use cases to worry about. For the press, we wanted to give them a solution which there would be no question marks around the actual authenticity or provenance of the records. In short, we wanted to give them a solution where the records would be made available in their original format. And we also wanted to make sure that the journalists could see the records, but not download them and share them with somebody else, because as to remind you, these records were not yet publicly available. For the public, the requirement was simpler, but maybe even more difficult, because we had to have an access solution which could make these records available at scale and be simple as well. And there were hard deadlines, as I say, to meet. So the next couple of slides have lots of information, so we'll just let that simmer up there. But it basically gives you the requirements relating to that particular user community, and then the solution that we went for, and then the strengths and weaknesses of how that solution stood up. So we did look in-house for solutions. I think that's a very important point, because NRS has a lot of tools and expertise and resources floating around to use for things like collecting the census and administering births, deaths and marriages. So we had a tool called Objective Connect, which is a product of the Objective ERDM system, which allows for the secure transfer of file sharing of files. What was quite nifty about this is, nifty, is that an English word? I'm not sure. What was quite clever about this is that it allowed for us to actually manufacture a virtual reading room, in essence, because we were able to send the journalists registration details in advance of the day when the records would be made available for them. They were able to log in a controlled environment, look at the records, not download the records, and we could also, from our side, get really good information on who was looking at what and for how long and so on. So we were getting much better user analysis, really, than ever before. Weaknesses, as with many of these things, it was a wee bit of a square peg round hole. So we had to do quite a lot of work to make the records fit and be right for Objective Connect, and we had to use tools such as Munpack flying in there to make sure that email attachments were actually being presented correctly on Objective Connect, and that took a bit of resource, but we managed to get that stood up, and none of the journalists complained about using this, which I think was a major victory. I don't know if it'll be a long-term solution for this particular user group, but it worked for that, and it worked for both years of the records. For the public, we looked around again in-house, and as it happens, NRS has quite a well-known website called Scotland's People, which we use for making digitised copies of our records available to the public. We were able to basically use that website to make these digital records available to the public for free. And this was good because Scotland's People is the main sort of platform that NRS sees as the way to make more records available to the public. It's also got good scale, and because we have a license already for it and a development contract in place for it, it didn't cost us very much to kind of bolt the cabinet records onto the side of this. Its main limitation is that because it's there to share digitised images of analogue records, it's image format only. So we had to actually normalise how am I doing for time? Right, I think it's 13.5 on average. So we had to normalise everything down to PDF image format, and we couldn't do that for all of the records, and we also had to use rather a lot of graft and tools to actually convert all of these things into PDF, and I'm looking over at Eve, who was heavily involved in doing that graft to get these things all Scotland's People ready, let's say. And there was rather a lot of graft involved in that. But we managed to deliver this on time, and it's now there as a resource going forward. So to conclude, I've put the innovate definition from the English dictionary on screen there for you, given this is the innovation strand. And we've innovated quite a lot in the last couple of years to meet this particular need. Because before the pandemic, we could only make copies of digital records available in that there room, the historical search room, or on USB stick, which is not great. And now we actually make them available on the Scotland's People website, which is really good. So please have a look at that whenever you have time. And with the foundations laid, and we'll go from here. So corny thing at the end. I noticed from looking through some of the cabinet records that I think in 2006 the Scottish Cabinet was trying to bid for Glasgow to be awarded the Commonwealth Games, which it got, and it was great fun. And the line there is that to get the Commonwealth Games would provide a lasting legacy for Glasgow and the nation. So hopefully what we've done through the pandemic and setting up this access solution gives a lasting foundation for born digital access at NRS. So thank you.
Thank Thank you to Garth. This is a great session for looking at how different projects and institutions were flexible. I think there's an argument for this session also being resilience and not just innovation. Are there any questions for Garth? Got Kaylin at the back. Sorry, we've got a microphone coming. Sorry, Kaylin, should have said.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Can you offer us any tips or guidance to encourage record creators to deposit metadata with their records? Just what's the secret if you have it?
We have a lot of records with no metadata attached to them, but let's call it a legacy issue. Hopefully going forward we'll try and do better on getting proper metadata along with the records. The difficulty for us is that we're a public archive and a private archive, and we have much more kind of, I hate that word leverage, but we have much more incentive, or there's more incentive for government bodies to give us good metadata along with their records, so we can do our job and make their lives easier by making these records as accessible and as preservable as possible. It's an interesting question. You kind of have to spin it and boil it down really, really, really well, I think, to basically get that trust or that vulnerability, as Tamar was saying during her presentation this morning. Kind of make yourself vulnerable to say, you know, we're a National Archive, but you know, we're only as good as what you give us. So if you give us scrappy records, all we can do is scrappy preservation, never mind scrappy access. So I think there's this kind of issue that they see us as the kind of new. They'll give us our they will give us their records. Sorry, couldn't get my order there, and we'll do the rest. Whereas it's much more of a quid pro quo, and if they don't deliver on giving us good records, we can't preserve them for them. And metadata is part of that. So.
Any other questions for Garth? I've got one if nobody else does. Do we have any questions on the Slido? No. Laurie, I've got a microphone here. I was shown how this worked. Well, yeah, we'll not enter an unnecessary complication into this.
So this might be an in-the-weeds question, but I thought it was fascinating that you need to make the records available to the journalists first. So did you have to do all the records in 2 different systems, or just selected records for the journalists?
Yeah, yeah. With reasonably small project teams for each of the platforms, and with only one archive team looking after both sides of it. So yeah, that's why I was emphasising the amount of tools that we had to use at very short notice to actually deliver. So that's why that also is why I was saying that I don't think the Objective Connect is a long-term solution for the press, because we don't want to always have to worry about managing two instances for the same records each time. So unfortunately, that will be what we use this year, but hopefully not for too much longer.
I've actually got a related question, so I'll just go ahead and slip it in there. I was wondering, because you talked about none of the journalists complained about having to use this platform, which is remarkable.
Neil loved that point.
Were there only 2 of them? So I was wondering if you did any communication with them before, or provided some guidance to show them, here's the system, here's how it works.
That's a good point. Neil would be better to speak to this if Neil's around, I don't know, because it would be Neil and his colleagues who would be that primary interface with the depositor and indeed with the press. And I know that Neil and his team do talk. I think they engage with the press reasonably early and just letting them know what the records, you know, what shape they're in or when we're going to make them available and so on. And they also do, I think, produce some sort of further descriptive information for them ahead of time, which does end up on the public website as well. So there is an element of, you know, helping ourselves and making the records as interpretable early on, and then giving that to the press and sort of using them as the guinea pig to understand, are the finding aids which we've produced good enough for them? And the fact that they didn't complain, I think, is a validation in this case. Absolutely. Anyway. Yeah.
Ali's got a. Is that from the Slido?
No, that's just me.
Oh, Ali, on you go. That's allowed.
So I was actually just wondering, are you going to seek any specific feedback about the access? Like, are you going to do a survey or anything just to try? Like you're saying, obviously, no one has complained, but are you going to be actively trying to see if there are anything that could be done better?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, we're a large organisation, so access isn't technically part of my team's area, so sorry, that's very boring. But Scotland's people doesn't really have, I don't think, very robust ways to draw in user feedback, certainly as far as we're concerned. And that needs to be much, much better. And NRS has in recent years been doing better customer analysis, but for this particular use case, and certainly for born digital access, by and large, we definitely need much more user information before making, I guess, more long-term decisions on how we're going to do this. This was all kind of done during an emergency because we had to do it. It's done the job for now, but like with anything, and like with parsimonious preservation, it might not be the long-term thing overall, and we'll move on to something else. But yeah, we would certainly need that user engagement before making firmer decisions on that.
I did see a hand here. Yeah, this will be the last question for Garth for now, and then we'll move on.
Hi, thank you. So you mentioned the two systems, and I assume both of those are for the redacted records.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm just curious what you did with the unredacted records and how you plan to integrate them when it comes time to declassify those.
Certainly, yeah, it's pretty simple. So we receive 2 copies of these records, one redacted, which becomes open, and one unredacted, which remains closed. And so that's why the manifest is so important, because in the manifest it tells us line by line when the sensitivity, which is creating those redactions, falls away. And as soon as the sensitivity falls away, we'll just swap swap it out and put the unredacted version in there, and that'll be the simple way to manage that.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Garth.